Good morning, everybody. Welcome to proper procedure for appraisals. My name is Kenneth Hendrix. I'm a NAMS certified marine surveyor and an accredited member of the American Society of Appraisers. I work with DLS Marine. We're based out of New Orleans or Metairie, Louisiana, and Liberty Beach office. First keystroke, it's not going.
Oh. Just hold in. Do that again. Off you go.
Sorry about that. Okay, so when to even get into talking about appraisal or even marine survey for that matter, a lot of times ethics, I mean, we all know it's part of what we do. A lot of times it's a footnote. I wanted to make it the first slide to talk about before we go any further. Ethics being moral principles that govern a person's behavior or the conducting of an activity, according to Oxford Dictionary. An accredited appraiser or a certified marine surveyor or accredited marine surveyor, you know, we all have to have our continuing education credit and ethics to maintain our certifications. While some of our value as surveyors and appraisers comes from what we know, comes just as much from our credibility and using our knowledge to arrive at an opinion. And it could be an opinion of condition, an opinion of cause, or as appraisers, an opinion of value. For example, you know, probably the most routine ethical situation we might run into. Somebody's asking us to revise our report, revise our opinion, change the value. As an appraiser, we don't just arbitrarily change our values. When we've arrived at an opinion of value, it's because we've applied a systematic methodology to arrive at a credible and supportable objective opinion of value. So, you know, when we have these discussions with, you know, a client, you know, I think it's worth more than this. Okay, well, why? I'll sit and listen as long as it takes to concerns from another party. But eventually I'm going to ask them, can you provide me any data to support a change, whether it's to go up in value or down in value? If somebody can provide me something that I did not already have, absolutely, I can apply that to the methodology to come to an opinion of value because it's new information, it's objective. All right, well, we already covered that. Lloyd, I'm glad he stepped out. He did not want to hear about the uniform standards of professional appraisal practice.
What did you say?
You didn't want to hear about USPAP.
That's why I walked out.
Yeah, I know. All right. Basic principle behind USPAP, any appraisal report should be transparent in the process for reaching a value, and it can be understood by any third-party reader. I know a lot of independent appraisers, you know, may not necessarily have taken USPAP courses or even be required to provide a USPAP compliant report. As an accredited appraiser, we have to maintain continuing education credits in USPAP course material. It's optional for personal property. It's the law for real property, real estate. We're appraising personal property, you know, vessels mainly, and it's optional in that, but typically clients would require financial institutions, maybe insurance companies. Probably a lot of it may depend on the value of the asset, whether or not they, you know, want an accredited appraiser or a USPAP compliant report. All right, just before we move too much further, definitions and DLS Marine appraisal reports. They're based on those adopted by the American Society of Appraisers, Machinery and Technical Specialties Committee in 2010, and those found in the current effective edition of USPAP. So if I mention definitions, that's where I get my definitions and the definitions that we live by. So the appraiser is one who is expected to perform valuation services competently and in a manner that is independent, impartial, and objective. An appraisal is the act or process of estimating value or an estimate of value. This applies to the valuation of all types of property. Value is defined as the monetary worth of property, goods, or services. So in other words, an appraisal is an unbiased opinion of value or other physical attributes of identified property. Appraisal practice, the definition includes all valuation services performed by an individual who is acting as an appraiser. Valuation process is a systematic procedure employed by appraisers to provide answers to their clients' questions about value. And it begins when the appraiser fully understands and identifies the appraisal problem at hand, and concludes when the appraiser reports the situation or the solution to the client. Definitions are boring, but we've got to get to them. So fair market value, and I believe me, I've only put a few definitions, but these are the big three. Fair market value, an opinion expressed in terms of money at which a property would change hands between a willing buyer and a willing seller, neither under any compulsion to buy or sell, and both having reasonable knowledge of relevant facts as of a specific date. Orderly liquidation value, an opinion of the gross amount expressed in terms of money that could be typically realized from a liquidation sale, given a reasonable period of time to find a purchaser or purchasers, with the seller being compelled to sell on an as is, where is basis as of a specific date. Forced liquidation value, an opinion of the gross amount expressed in terms of money that could typically be realized from a properly advertised and conducted public auction, with the seller being compelled to sell with a sense of immediacy on an as is, where is basis as of a specific date. For our purposes as a company at DLS, orderly liquidation value, we consider marketing time to be less than 180 days. For fair market value, there's no time frame. You put it on the market. If it sells in 2 days or if it sells next year, you know, that's the value we put on it. Orderly liquidation, you know, there's compulsion to sell. Forced liquidation, there's much stronger compulsion to sell. All right, so the valuation process, what's relevant? Of course, the definitions of value, FMV, OLV, FLV. Identification of the property. The assets should be identified by collection of data and inspection of assets. List and describe the assets. So there are a lot of one-off vessel appraisals, or it could be a collection of vessels, fleet. I've have experience doing entire shipyards. That would include, you know, all of the floating assets, dry docks, tugs, barges, yard boats, whatever might be there. But then you move to the facility itself. Every tool and piece of equipment in the fab shop, the overhead cranes, forklifts, golf carts, trucks, trailers, all of that falls under personal property and machinery, technical specialties, discipline, accreditation. And all of those are less complex than trying to value a floating asset, believe it or not. Well, I'm sure you believe it because it's basically a sales comparison approach. So you'll classify the assets, you'll research cost data for your cost approach to value, research market data for your sales comparison approach to value, research income data for the income approach to value, and we'll get into that a little more a few slides down the road here. All right, so proper procedures for appraisal. Define the problem, the type of appraisal required, the property to be appraised, the purpose of the appraisal, the use and users of the appraisal, the date of the appraisal, and limiting conditions. Those are imperative points to cover in the assignment and ultimately in the appraisal report. Statement of work. Who's the client? Is this for a finance company, a bank? Is it for an insurance company? Is it for the present owner, the current owner? Is it for a prospective buyer? I think that's in the yachts and small craft world. Probably the bread and butter is prospective purchase and followed by insurance, I would think. Statement of work. What is to be appraised, the vessel, the equipment. And I know that it's repeating somewhat what we've said. But this is things that need to be nailed down ahead of time before we go out into the field. So what is to be appraised, the vessel, the equipment, and then categorized by type. I'll use a tugboat example. The size of the tugboat, the horsepower of the tugboat. Tugboats come down to dollars per horsepower value. They can have granite countertops, they can have formica countertops, they can have tough flex decking, they can have painted steel decking with the pretty flecks of color in it. It's still dollars per horsepower. So, and the utility, model bow tug, push boat, different utility there. All right, statement of work. And this is extremely important. Why is the appraisal being performed? If it's for insurance, insurance is going to want you during the course of your inspection to point out risks. Now, you go on a commercial boat or even a small craft, you're going to want to know, you're going to want to identify risks. If a gas tank is about to, be so eroded that it's got a hole in it, insurance company is going to want to know that. If the transom is about to fall off of somebody's Grady White, well, it's going to want to know that. So why is it being performed? Insurance, pre-purchase, due diligence, or financing. Statement of work, continuing on, where will the appraisal be produced? Meaning the market. Not, am I going to do a survey in Washington State and then I'm going back to my office in Virginia Beach to produce the appraisal report. The appraisal is conducted in Washington State. So my sales comparison approach is going, and actually my cost approach, I'm going to use build costs for West Coast. I'm going to use comparable market offerings from the West Coast. Gulf of Mexico is, I would say, the cheapest region in the continental United States as far as building, owning, selling marine assets, probably even yachts and small craft for that matter. West Coast is the most expensive. Of course, the East Coast, we are right in the middle, as we should be. But also it could be Europe, Asia, Australia, anything out of the United States in the commercial world, not subject to Jones Act requirements, therefore a lot cheaper to own and operate. All right, when will the appraisal be started? When is it to be completed? What is the date of value? All of that is, except for the date of value, start and finish date, those depend on availability, accessibility, schedule. Date of value is, that needs to be set in stone in our report. Because the date or the value we provide is as of that date. And an appraisal report that's a couple of months old could be obsolete, especially in volatile market times. Build costs, steel costs, things such as that, they're fluctuating rapidly, or labor costs for that matter as well. The appraisal date matters. It absolutely matters. So when was the inspection held? When you inspect the boat, the appraisal report needs to follow in fairly short order. Our target is usually, say, 10 business days following the survey. Unless it's very complete, then we usually have maybe a 6 to 8 week time frame to complete everything. But always the value is as of a specific date, because an appraisal more than a few months old is, I said, very well maybe obsolete, most likely it's obsolete. How will the appraisal report be prepared and completed? Will the appraiser conduct the inspection? Will the vessel be inspected or surveyed at all? Lloyd doesn't like this. Not every appraisal requires an in-person inspection. I know that's not necessarily a popular assertion. You can provide a limited scope appraisal to a client, provided that you address that in your appraisal report. Sometimes, it may just be for, high level numbers. If I provide a limited scope appraisal, I would be more conservative and I would have, extraordinary assumptions in my appraisal report that I didn't see this subject asset, but based on the information provided to me, I would say my opinion of value was this as of this date. And, all of a sudden, if it comes back and, this vessel didn't have engines in it, well, it was assumed to be in fully operating condition. So now we have objective data that says we need to change that. Appraisal report. So there's 3 types of appraisal reports. You have a self-contained appraisal report, summary appraisal report, and a restricted appraisal report. Restricted appraisal report, think the lawyer that we had in yesterday, they don't want to have things in writing or as little as possible in writing. So that may be a verbal report given over the phone for them to work with as they do their lawyer thing to negotiate, settlement or decide whether to go to court. Because things in writing, our work product, I guess it can be part of discovery in a legal matter. Summary appraisal report is an abbreviated description of the asset that we appraised. So we did inspect it and there's some particulars on it. Then a self-contained appraisal report is going to have a full description. The reader should be able to, actually it should have pictures in it in the digital age, but the readers should be able to know exactly what they're reading about for when they're getting that value. All right, approaches to value. You mentioned earlier, we have the cost approach, sales comparison approach, and the income approach. Cost approach to value is one of the 3 recognized approaches to value that begins with the reproduction cost new or replacement cost new and deducts all forms of depreciation to determine an estimate of value. It considers that the maximum value of a property to a knowledgeable buyer would be that amount currently required to construct a new one of equal utility, adjusting for differences in age, condition, and any other depreciation factors. Under any cost approach, you have replacement cost is the most commonly used starting point. If you have one tugboat, you're going to get another tugboat. How much does it cost to replace this one? Now, reproduction cost that comes in, say you've got a one-of-a-kind item that you're not an old wooden Chesapeake Bay boat. They aren't being built anymore. I appraised one down in Deltaville. That was for the museum to know the value of their museum piece. So I had to come up with a reproduction cost for that. But once the reproduction or replacement costs are arrived at, then you would deduct from that, say, a scrap, terminal, or residual value as applicable. And most likely it's going to be residual, at the end of its life. It still has a little bit of value, maybe in another service, or maybe if it was sold for parts, it has engines in it, maybe it has some unique pieces that somebody might want to strip off and sell separately before the whole thing is scrapped. So replacement cost less residual value divided by economic life. We have our in-house metrics that we use for economic life, or useful life is another term there. But everybody seems to have or can have a different opinion of what the economic or useful life of an asset is. For a tugboat, we'll use 30 years. After 30 years, usually they're going to require some significant capital expenditure to extend the life of that asset. All right, so after you've divided, that gives you your annual depreciation. We'll multiply that by the remaining useful life, which is however many years it has left after you deducted the age of it. And then add back the terminal or residual value. It's sterile mathematical approach. And it really is spot on. We track data from known sales and such as that, and the metrics that we have been using, they're good, and we even apply that when we see an orderly liquidation sale or a forced liquidation sale, and if we find that maybe we're a couple of percent further off than we want to be, we'll adjust, but we don't usually have to adjust. It works well when you have a journal and a history of just tracking. All right, sales comparison approach. One of the three recognized approaches whereby recent sales and offering prices of similar assets or items of similar utility are compared to the subject item. If necessary, the comparables are adjusted to reflect the characteristics of the subject asset. If the comparable is superior to the subject, a downward adjustment is applied, and if the comparable is inferior to the subject, an upward adjustment is applied. The resulting adjusted sale price give an indication of the value of the subject. So all that to say, we find a whole lot of similar assets to our subject. We will, for a tugboat, we would use dollars per horsepower metric and maybe graph it onto a spreadsheet. There's any number of ways. Yes, Lloyd?
So why would you use the dollars per horsepower method for cost?
For sales comparison?
Sales comparison, sorry.
Because what we've been able to do, especially with Microsoft Excel, we're able to dollars per horsepower based on year of construction. And in the Excel spreadsheet, we're able to get a dollars per horsepower formula, and we can apply that to the subject. So it's kind of like if you had graph paper and you put all your assets by year and cost on your XY axis, and you could draw a little line in there and try to maybe discern where your asset would be. With Excel, it pinpoints an exact figure. Now, our expertise does come into play because we have to be able to discern the nuanced differences, especially from, what was it, 2018 to 2022, as subchapter M was being implemented. Does this thing have a COI? Does it not? That was a significant effect on value because there were expected costs. And if it doesn't, and we're in the middle of the subchapter M implementation cycle, why doesn't this have a COI yet? Is there a problem with it? Then we need, that's where our expertise, and chatbot isn't going to fix that. Yes, Lloyd?
So you're talking about COIs, and whether it's with the tug or whether it's a depot, the passenger vessel. I mean, does that add value to the vessel? Because of the compliance issue with the Coast Guard, or is it just part of the nature of owning that boat?
No, absolutely. Whether or not the vessel has the proper certificates and documents, if you have a passenger vessel that does not have its subchapter T or K certification, or a tugboat without its subchapter M certification, that is a form of obsolescence. If it doesn't have that, it's number one, why doesn't it have that? The surveyor side of us needs to figure out why. And then there's a cost to get it. Even if it's only the dry docking cost, if there's no material problem with the boat, it still has to be dry docked and inspected. So that's going to affect value. That's a cost to cure a deficiency. And it's a known deficiency if a boat that carries passengers does not have the credentials it needs to carry passengers. The value is diminished because it's not able to operate in its full utility.
I mean, I just have heard that question several times posted on boat posters. Does a COI add value for a vessel that's out of COI? Does it depreciate the value?
If the asset needs the certificate to be operated in its highest and best use, that's another one of those appraisal definitions that I avoided putting on here. But if a vessel requires a certificate to trade in its highest and best use, if it does have it, it does not add value. It lets it achieve the proper value that it should have. If it does not have the certificate, then the value is decreased through obsolescence. Does that make sense? Anybody else?
Yeah.
All right.
More deficiency, less money.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's that question.
More deficiency, less money.
That's
Absolutely.
right.
Okay. So
Okay,
yes.
back, I know you do commercial more so than small credit.
Yeah.
So here we have pre-pandemic pricing for small and small credit. And then we have pricing for COVID. Right, okay, does that increase the price of new boats and used boats? Okay, and then now you have post-pandemic, now the pricing is now going down for new boats and used boats. talked to a dealer the other day, they take about 30% off their stock to get it moving. Okay, because the interest rate and stuff like that. So when we go out there and use bug, AD, and cargo, sold, both, find all these numbers for appraising our vessels and getting the replacement value. Kind of hard to do right now in that aspect, because you have 3 years ago or 2 years ago, you had the pandemic crisis skyrocket.
That, I was glad you mentioned that. That was,
And now you have it coming down, so all the data that these things we use have the pandemic pricing in it. So it's very hard to do, just put that statement out there, what do you think?
so all of that'll fall under, well, actually, we go sales compare, actually all three approaches to value. So our observation during the pandemic, like you said, yachts and small craft, personal watercraft or personally owned assets through the roof. Why? Because we had to socially distance. So everybody bought a boat. I don't know, maybe people were getting free money and whatever the reason, people were buying a lot of boats. And yes, values went through the roof. Conversely, on the commercial side, tour boats, water taxis, fill in the blank, whatever it is. We had tremendous concern from financial clients. What in every appraisal report we did, and there were a lot of them because everybody was very scared. What is the impact of COVID on the value of this asset, this fleet of assets? And actually, we partner with a company, we'll value entire businesses. And what, you know, the impact of COVID on the business. And we would research that, and we did find, you know, there was a dip, especially in the early part, and then, you know, it was a short dip and then came back with an incline as measures were implemented, you know. Okay, not everybody doesn't have to stay in their house now, wear a mask, you know, get a shot, whatever it is. So all that to say, it was reflected in the market that, you know, when we had to stay away from everybody got on their own boat. And then there's a saturation of boats in the market. Everybody's going back to work now. So now they have these boats sitting at home that they're not using. Now everybody's trying to sell them, values are down, increased supply.
So the commercial side of it, the COVID, and that didn't affect the pricing in the commercial end of it at all?
There was a dip in
Recreation, I guess, tour boats?
tour boat, yeah, not recreational, but passenger vessels. There was a bit of a dip, but that was offset by government money. Remember, there was money handed out to businesses to keep from going under. So that had to be factored in, and it made my head hurt a lot. So values, while there may have been a little dip, the government money that was handed out helped that. It helped to sustain these businesses through the heat of the pandemic. So I hope that answers your question. As far as you know, commercial side, energy transport, you know, liquid cargoes, things like that, almost unchanged. Actually, I mean, all it was a little more difficult for crew changes and things like that.
So
But-
again, back to small craft, how
Yeah.
do you appraise and come up with the replacement value of these crafts now post COVID?
The same way I always do. I call. I try to call builders or if I see you know, I'm doing research on the internet and Yacht World has a new build 55-foot Leopard, then I'll apply that. Or if it's a new build from 2021 that hasn't sold yet, I might index that to 2023 if I can't find any better data. But I'll call. We always, and that's how we keep our replacement cost information as current as possible. And it can be tedious, but we call around, we call shipyards, builders, anybody we can.
Okay, I'm worried about that. That's what kind of what I do.
Yeah, Cabo, I'd call them.
All the dealers, what this, what's the.
Yep. All right.
Thank you.
All right, so let's see, we covered the sales comparison approach. Income approach to value, one of three recognized approaches to value. that considers the present worth of future benefits derived from ownership, measured through capitalization at a specific level of income. This approach may utilize an annualized capitalization method or a discounted cash flow analysis. Not going to get too deep in the weeds on that. I personally have never valued a single asset via the income approach. It's cumbersome for owners or operators to give us the financial information that we need. And they're very happy with the cost approach or the sales comparison approach. Now, USPAP, and I would think good appraisal practice requires that we consider in every appraisal assignment, we consider all three. We give serious consideration to all three approaches to value. But it's easy to know that you're not going to get the financial information you need on an asset. So income approach is out the window. If you've got a 1982 Bertram that you're valuing, might not get a replacement cost on that. So you've considered it, did not utilize it, and then you go to your sales comparison approach, Buck Book and Yacht World and everything else.
So like a Bertram charter boat. Boats worth something, but the business is not.
Well, then you get into the business valuation aspect of it. So I see what you're saying, because you're talking about there's an overlap to the value of the boat via the business it conducts.
Especially if it's in a popular place, a good slip, has a reputation.
Florida Keys.
Well, that's where I grew up, a charter boat in the Florida Keys. So
Yeah.
our business was really your business.
Yeah, absolutely.
You sell the boat in your slip, you're not necessarily getting my clients.
Exactly, and that's more business than asset. If that boat that you operate, if it went away tomorrow and you had to bring in another boat,
Or if I left and somebody came in. That's what usually happens, is the older timers would sell their boat to somebody, and then they're gonna run the boat now, and well, where's Mike? Because now this guy Fred's here, well, I don't know him.
yeah, you're really hopscotching the line between business valuation and income approach. Now, as the business, if you're willing to share your financial information for the income that boat produces, by all means, conduct an income approach, because it would probably work out to your value there. And the sale of the company, so you're not going to sell Fred's not going to sell that boat to Steve. Fred's selling the business to Steve, and the boat is a central point of the business, but the business is the whole package. So you would either be looking at a business valuation or an income value.
We've seen that blown up. An old timer sells his boat to the new guy and leaves, and then in 6 months, he was doing 300 days a year.
Yeah,
Now the new guy's doing 150 because nobody knows who he is.
that, or maybe the new guy's a jerk. We don't know yet.
Right, that's just it.
It could be anything.
It's really not worth, the business is not really, it's your business. You can't really transfer it. Transfer the boat and slip.
Yeah,
You really can't transfer that business.
I mean, that's as simple as you take one Hardee's restaurant with good management, and that good management leaves, and you get poor management in a short order.
Boom,
Yeah, I'm not getting my ham biscuits there anymore.
that's right.
So that's business valuation and income approach value, and you're figuring the present value of future dollars, or you're capitalizing what the earning history was.
Unlike a time on a long-term contract, you sell it and it's still got the contract, it's still working.
Yeah, long term, yes. A lot, or short term, that it all has to be figured, uniquely to the situation.
Yeah, I would think that's where the date comes in.
The date
Yeah,
comes in.
Exactly.
Today,
Today,
this is what you get.
nice.
Yeah, good point, very good point.
Very good.
Yeah, and your passenger boat, your value in June of 2023 was $900,000. But in September of 2023, the COI expired and nobody renewed it. Well, I've got this appraisal from June of 2023, and I'm showing you the boat in October. See what I'm saying? Now you took a hit. In June, it was going to get its fair market value at its highest and best use. Now, in October, it's not going to, because it doesn't have its COI. That's economic obsolescence, for what it's worth. while we're on the topic, functional obsolescence, we'll go through that really quick. That is basically you've got worn out electronics. You're not ADA compliant. Anything that is inherent to the boat itself that is not as good as what it could be. And there's a long verbose definition, but that's the simple answer. Economic obsolescence is conditions external to the vessel. So whether it does or doesn't have its trading certificates, COI, load line, if it's required to have a load line, class certificates, things like that. That is economic obsolescence. All right. Oh, somebody have a question? I thought I heard a question. Assumptions and limiting conditions, So the valuation, it is for a specific purpose. Now, from one survey, we can issue a report to the bank for financing. And we can issue a report to insurance for writing a policy. But the individual appraisal report, each one needs to be for that specific purpose. I would advise against, we did the undersigned did this survey for insurance and financing purposes. I mean, just print 2 reports or, make 2 PDFs and change it. That way each report has its own purpose. Not to mention on our end, if we're doing a report for an appraisal for a condition evaluation for insurance, we put recommendations in. If it's for the bank, we don't put recommendations in. I don't know if the yachts and small craft world, I imagine you probably have recommendations. Yeah. All right. You must, under assumptions and limiting conditions, value is a professional opinion only. We are not telling anybody that this is going to sell for $1.5 million. We're saying that based on our research, it's our opinion that this is what the value is. As of the specific date, assuming there's responsible crewing and ownership. Fuel tanks haven't been neglected. Shade tree mechanics haven't put hex nuts or wing nuts where hex nuts should be. They haven't run hot electrical wires past fuel connections, all the other things that are pointed out at the other conferences. Yes.
Quick question about, value price. Do you always have like a specific number? Or do you ever provide a range? And is there any merit to, it's 7 to 850? Or you always, it's a number?
We put a number. Because it is our opinion of value as of that specific date. Now, with business valuations, I see that there's generally a range of value. Generally because a business is not going to sell like an asset would. There's a lot of due diligence, research, and lawyer stuff to be done. So for a specific asset, as a value as of a specific date. I have seen where other appraisers do put a range of value. Hypothetically, if I say this barge is worth $500,000 to $700,000. Well, somebody may think, okay, they'll offer me 6, but not Kenner. Kenner's going to say, I'll offer you 4. If you said 5 to 7, I'm going with the low and offering you less than that. Worst case scenario, I might give you 5. So for that reason, and more reasons than that, but our methodology does allow us to come at a defensible, credible, supportable number. So we go with that.
Okay.
All right. Values do not include brokerage, storage, relocation fees, etc. If now, say you have your fair market value, $1.5 million, and there's no deadline that something has to sell. It's just fair market value as of that date is this. Well, the thing's been, maybe it was left at a shipyard or a dock. There is cost to just tie up a boat and abandon it. Somebody's charging somebody somehow. That's not factored into our value. Now, we may give a gross fair market value or a gross orderly liquid, and I'm sorry, not gross, net. pardon me, net orderly liquidation or net fair market value. That would back out storage or relocation fees if it was requested. We don't provide that unless it's specifically requested. In the yacht small craft world, you know, next month I'm gonna buy the 60-foot Viking that's for sale down in Miami. And I'm gonna get Lloyd to bring it up for me. And I'm gonna have to pay Lloyd. So that would be, it's extra cost to have to pay. So it's not necessarily value to that.
You can do it for nothing.
I don't know, he was shaking his head no.
I'm gonna call my brother. Because it does have a piece of shit. Brady White on top of that.
I said it was a Viking. Values do not consider encumbrances if there's a lien on an asset. We can't necessarily know that, and I'm not doing legal research to figure it out. So that's a separate matter. Value is considered to be in cash without consideration for contracts, etc. Now that, other than the income approach, so contracts, whoever was mentioning that, the business side, you know, contracts and such, they will can contribute to value in the income approach or as a business valuation. Sales comparison and cost approach, no. Machinery and systems, where they operated and tested, we're going to mention that in our report. Sometimes, you know, I've been called, hey, I need you to go, I've literally gone to the backwoods of Louisiana, out in some swamp, and crawled onto a crew boat that has been dry stacked forever. And there's cobwebs and rodents and everything else, not exaggerating. I think one guy had a rattlesnake encounter, another guy with our company has had, I know of a raccoon encounter, probably other things. Nothing's going to get operated or tested in that survey. And so that is going to be noted in the report. And it's not uncommon, especially in the commercial world.
Gators also.
What's that?
Gators, alligators.
Yes. Luckily, I have not fallen in the water and had to deal with that.
They're coming out of abandoned boats.
Yeah. Latent defects, obviously, we can't always know about that. It's very rare that we can know about a latent defect. If an engine had, you know, cylinders about to fail on it, we can't know that something is about to fail. So if it's purchased at the fair market value that we assigned, they crank it up to take it home, all of a sudden you've got a blown engine. We couldn't have known about that. So we put that in our report that, you know, everything as we saw it was as we reported, with assumptions and limiting conditions. This is all about covering your backside, people.
Yeah.
The report is for the client of record only. If I appraised your business or your boat, your asset down in the Keys, and I did it for you, it's for you only. Now, hey, my bank needs it to be for them. I could list your bank as an intended user, or I could reissue my report for, I could basically just engage, your bank could engage me as the client, and then, you know, then I could issue the report to them. So there's ways, everything can be done. It just has to be addressed so that it's not the wild west of paperwork, you know, where appraisal reports are flying around and who knows why it was done or when it was done. It's all about keeping everything orderly and organized and without room for loose interpretation.
I was brought up where you share it with your client only and tell the client you're welcome to share it with whoever you want.
Oh, that's exactly what I do.
That's it.
You know, even if I'm engaged by an owner to survey a damage, and the insurance company says, well, I'm their insurance company.
Get it from the owner.
Yeah, or you engage my services and we let the owner know, and then I'm your client, my report is your property. But our report is the property of the client who engaged us.
Only.
Yes. All right, and of course, last confidentiality goes back to client of record only, that and not, you know, not having the gossip on the street. All right. That was everything. Good questions along the way. I like to have questions. I like a discussion instead of a monologue. But any other questions at all? All right, well, Thanks for your time, everybody. Thank you in computer land, and see you next time. Oh, I got my tugboat. All right, thank you. Oh, excuse me, sorry. How long?